Did the establishment play too much of its hand on Super Tuesday? And are they out of their bag of tricks? We're going to answer this QBounti question live. Thanks for tuning in. So we have a QBounti question from an anonymous viewer who asks, do I believe that the establishment is out of its bag of tricks? And the answer to that is, well, yes and no. Yeah, but no at the same time. So let's start off with the no, right? At the end of the day, as long as there are states that are still using election machines or voting machines, then they're not out of their bag of tricks, right? I'm just being realistic. Because if you look at the areas where the voting machines are prevalent, the discrepancy in the exit polling is it's ridiculous. It's criminal, honestly. So from that perspective, no, right? When you have areas like California where they can take these ballots that they call provisional ballots by the hundreds of thousands, discard them, refuse to count them as a vote, and then pretend like those ballots had never been cast, because that's essentially what happened in California, not only in 2020 but in 2016 as well, and in 2018. No, they're not out of their bag of tricks, because yeah, they did that in California, but they could do it again, because California isn't even done being counted, right? So you see that the lead somehow is shrinking more and more and more, despite the fact that the counties that were being counted last were dominantly Bernie Sandersville. Okay, you have situations like in Florida where they have voting machines and paper ballots. However, what they do is they just haul off the paper ballots to some unknown location, breaking the chain of custody. So they can still do all of those things until somebody from the Sanders camp asserts the reality of the situation, which is that there is rampant election fraud, elections and voter suppression by the Democratic establishment. Until we address this and stop being afraid to state the obvious, then that trick will always be used against the establishment. So, or excuse me, against Bernie Sanders by the establishment. So that's the reality of the situation. Now, on the other side of that fence, that is something that I believe Bernie anticipated, right? So the basic types of election rigging that Bernie Sanders has, at the bare minimum, tolerated since this election has started, I think he was somewhat anticipatory of it, and that's why he's not really reacting to the degree that you would think he reacted. The tricks that also were somewhat effective is why I say it's a yes and a no answer. I believe it's a yes as far as them running out of them. Why is that? Because some of them they're just absolute, right? You can do it once, you can't do it again. What do I mean by that? There was one trick that was used this election that a lot of people didn't even think about. We've talked about it briefly here on this show, and I talked about it on the Convo Couch when I was in LA with those people. The early voting was a major factor in Super Tuesday. What do I mean by that? Early voting, for whatever reason, generally goes towards establishment favorite candidates. The older voters, the more affluent voters, the voters who can just go when they feel like going. There's no reason that they have to, the ones who do their taxes in January instead of March and April. Those voters cast their ballots before Super Tuesday, despite the fact that Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg endorsed Biden and dropped out. I cannot stress enough how big of a deal this was, because you're looking at some states, hell, in one state, Buttigieg either beat Warren or almost beat Warren, despite the fact that Buttigieg wasn't even in the race. I think it was California at one point he was beating her. So those votes could not have gone towards Bernie Sanders, despite the fact that we do know a lot of those votes in Minnesota, for example, that went to Amy Klobuchar probably would have went to Bernie Sanders, right? It probably would have went to Bernie, because a lot of people were only voting for Amy in Minnesota because she was a homer, quote unquote. She's from that state. They like what she's gotten done. Amy hasn't been a bad senator for Minnesota. Surprisingly enough, as it is for me to say, you can say she's been a bad United States senator, as in for the good of the country, has she done good things, or not so good things, I should say. Yeah, especially when it comes to the military-industrial complex. But Amy Klobuchar did help work on this Medicare for All legislation alongside Kirsten Gillibrand and Bernie Sanders. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's much better than Obamacare. Amy Klobuchar has done some great things for Minnesota specifically. So they voted for her instead of Bernie because she's a homer. Those votes were cast early. Bernie Sanders did not get to take advantage of those. So that's the result. So that's a trick they will not be able to use again because it's an absolution. It's done. You can't do it again. You can't repeat that. That's a lot of votes, hundreds of thousands of potential votes. Some of them could go for Biden. Some of them could very well sit out. But a lot of them, ladies and gentlemen, especially because of Buttigieg's specific base and Warren, who we'll get to in a second, a lot of those will go to Bernie Sanders. So that trick has been worn out. They can't repeat it. Now let's move on to Elizabeth Warren, the other trick that they tried to pull, which is keeping Elizabeth Warren in the race to not only, like they've been using her as an attack dog against Bernie, which is crazy because, once again, the DNC isn't effective at winning elections, but they are effective at crushing progressives, and they do it by working together. Whereas progressives have this idea that you can only crush the establishment or beat the establishment by coalescing behind one person and one person alone. If you've noticed, every entry except for Deval Patrick, who had his entry kind of derailed initially because his wife got sick, so he came in later than expected. But other than Deval Patrick, every entry by a mainstream politician was very strategic, and except for maybe Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, them pulling out of their races, the timing of them pulling out of their races was also very strategic. Bloomberg coming in when he did to avoid the debates was very strategic. Bloomberg pulling out when he did, also very strategic. Warren staying in, knowing she couldn't win, very strategic. Pulling out directly after that, after she disallowed Bernie from taking Massachusetts from her. Disallowed Bernie from winning in Maine. Took a lot of his votes away in California as well, as expected. And tapped into his base in states where he needed all the quote-unquote progressive support. Because there are a lot of people who think that Warren's a progressive who are actually progressive and are supporting her because they don't know all the information, and she's been pitched as a younger version of Bernie. That was strategic. She dropped out only after she took all those votes away from Bernie Sanders, when people thought that she was actually going to go to the convention, which people kind of knew she would never do that. So that is what I'm saying when I'm saying we should have been trying to maneuver for Yang, Williamson, Tulsi to be in a position to beat the other establishment candidates, because in their own unique ways, they were peeling off votes from Buttigieg, peeling off votes from Biden, peeling off votes from Klobuchar. A lot of people were trying to decide between, for some reason, Tulsi Gabbard and Amy Klobuchar. Some people were trying to decide between Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang. I mean, this is real, like, existential crises that people were going through over trying to choose between them. And if we would have properly coalesced behind messages and let democracy take its place, we wouldn't have crushed so many allies up until this point. And that really, I mean, ostracizing every potential ally before Super Tuesday really hurt us. That was a trick that we could have used, and unfortunately the establishment used their tricks more effectively. They didn't ignore reality. They knew what they had to do. Some people at the right time put their selfish desires to the side of being president anyway. They thought about the future. They thought about their stability and their security as the establishment and said, you know what? Let's just shut up and work together. If only the progressives could do that. Because I haven't seen any of the establishment people shame Kamala for coming so late to the party. Just saying, maybe we can learn some lessons there. Rock Lee, thank you very much for the super chat. Will Kamala's endorsement hurt Bernie on Tuesday? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have a theory I put out in my last video that I think that Kamala was asked not to endorse Joe Biden because she was doing so badly with the black vote that it would actually be a net negative if Kamala came out and endorsed Joe Biden before the Southern Firewall states. So, but with that being said, however, we do have to realize that, like I said, even though they're out of those tricks, right? You can only endorse somebody one time. You can only steal votes through, if you've pulled out the race already, you can't steal early voting again, right? You can't do that. You can only pretend that you're actually trying to go to the convention while you're still in the race. None of that stuff is true anymore, right? So those tricks are out of the bag, but once again, we cannot ignore the election integrity issues. That's where we will have the most trouble, because it's like we're canaries in a coal mine. We're screaming from the rooftops, yo, this stuff is obvious now. Like there shouldn't even be a debate about this, and yet here we are having this damn debate. So we'll see what happens. It's good for Bernie that Super Tuesday is behind him. Bad for Bernie that a lot of states are still using voting machines. But it's good for Bernie that a lot of states that use paper ballots with paper ballot backups, all of those states went to Bernie in 2016. So we'll see, right? We'll see. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much. If you want to ask me a QBounti question, all you have to do is go to QBounti.com/Niko. The link is in the description below, but it's spelled QBounti.com/Niko. And you can get a video made about your question if I so choose. But most of y'all ask pretty damn good questions, so I generally choose to. That being said, people, always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell if you like that segment of Mikasa Sukasa. Of course, if YouTube is giving you trouble, as it always does, you can download the Rockfin app and follow us there. Also, if you want to continue to help our show grow, you can help us reach our goal of 500 patrons on Patreon and donate as little as $1. Really, anything helps. Other than that, always remember, people, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.